Hi, guys. Welcome back to another episode of the Everyday Educate podcast. I'm joined today with Dr. Heather. How's it going?
Thank you. Good. I'm doing wonderful. Happy Friday.
Awesome. Happy Friday to you as well. Thanks for jumping on. I know we've connected on social, on Instagram, um, and it's just, I love your work and the motivation and your daily habits and routines and everything that you do is very motivating. And
Oh.
I'm glad that you joined us. Um, I'd love to know maybe a little bit about yourself, your background, how you got into the education field, and we can take it from there.
Um, well, let's see. If I start with how I got into teaching, I got into teaching in a non-traditional pathway. I didn't know I wanted to be a teacher. I got my BA in Washington State, and I went to school that kind of focused on student-driven scholarship. And so I got to pick the different areas I wanted to study. I did a lot of time abroad in Mexico and learning Spanish. But when I graduated, I didn't really have any focus. I knew I wanted to make an impact in the world, but I didn't really know what exactly and where I wanted to put that energy. And I enjoyed working with kids. And so I got into teaching through the Teach for America program. And I'm not sure if you're familiar with that program, but it's Teach for America. It places recent college graduates in under-resourced, underserved areas for a 2-year commitment, um, with the idea that the the people that they were placing would ultimately go into policy positions, and kind of higher level political positions. And then because they had experience in the classroom, they would able to kind of make bigger policy decisions because they had that previous experience. Um, anyway, it's basically it's an internship program, and you get your credential while you're in the classroom. So I didn't have any experience. I was placed in Houston, Texas, and I just fell in love with teaching. I fell in love with the kids. I fell in love with teaching them how to read. I felt like it was a super concrete skill that I could attach my like social justice drive and interest to, and really make an impact on a daily basis. We're working with kids is great that way because you really see the impact that you can have. There's an immediacy to it, right? You see it in action, in live action. And so that's what I really appreciated about becoming a teacher in my first couple of years in the classroom. And from there, I moved. I did that for 2 years, and then from there, I moved over here to San Diego to live with my grandma. I got a job in a charter school and taught first and second grade for 13 years. Um, very close to the Mexican-U.S. border. The community I served was 70% Latino, 85% free and reduced lunch. So a lot of need in that community, and I enjoyed that for a long time. And then I had kind of reached my point where I was just giving, and not really replenishing and filling my cup, as they say, at all. So I didn't know how to set boundaries. I didn't know how to kind of distance myself from the emotional burden that teaching kind of has sometimes. Um, and so I got my doctorate, I furthered my education, got my master's and then my doctorate, and I started really enjoying working with teachers and specifically keeping teachers in the profession. Because when I learned that so many teachers leave the profession, and even more teachers of color leave the profession, I kind of I was like, well, we can't really make an impact in our schools if we can't keep teachers, high quality teachers in the classroom. And so that's really what all my like all of my consulting right now and my social media presence is all about: maintaining that presence and sustainability in the classroom, through the use of like critical wellness strategies. And so that's a lot of what I do right now. But it all kind of was inspired by my own experience those first years in the classroom, and then my own experience of like, falling in love with teaching and just throwing myself into it, but then realizing, okay, this isn't sustainable for the long term. Like I can't do this forever. So
Can you explain critical wellness strategy? I don't think I've heard that before, but my brain kind of lit up when you said that. What is that?
Yeah. So I talk about 5 different wellness strategies. On my profile, Instagram profiles where I'm on the most active. And I have the 5 that I picked are really, they're personal to me, but I also think they are really relevant to teachers because they're small things that you can do on a daily basis that can really impact your wellness. And so I talk about breath work, exercise or movement, journaling or reflection, an affirmation practice. And then I have a strategy called Think Big, Start Small.
Hmm.
Um, and I think one thing that happens with teachers that have a social justice orientation or just want to, are in this profession because they want to make an impact, they have a tendency to feel really overwhelmed with the teaching tasks, the big ideas they have, the things that they want to do that they want to do to kind of move their students forward, that they get so bogged down with like the details, right? So the think big, start small is like you have this idea, it may be a huge idea, but how can we put it into incremental steps, and how can each one of those incremental steps be a success in a step in the right direction? So I'm a huge advocate of the timer. Um, I do a lot of timer stuff because I get distracted myself and I have my hands in a lot of buckets. And so, you spoke before we got on, you spoke a little bit about, students with disabilities and different coping mechanisms and strategies in my house. It's very relatable. My son was diagnosed with ADHD and my daughter has just recently diagnosed with dyslexia. But getting back to me and how I use this strategy is like, I set a timer and okay, I'm going to work for 15 minutes in this area. I'm going to do this for 15 minutes. Um, we're going to, even if it's 5 minutes, as long as you're touching those different things every day, you feel less overwhelmed when you go to them again because you've at least worked for a little bit of time. And if you can tell yourself, I can do this for 15 minutes. I have 5 minutes to do this. I have 15 minutes to do this.
Mhm.
Instead of approaching a task and you're like, I'm never going to do it because it's too big, making it small so that you do feel like you're making progress.
Yeah, that's so good. And I feel like there's like hours of discussion, conversation just around those
Yeah.
5. But
Yeah.
would you say your main focus right now has kind of transitioned from uh, directly with the kids and now to teachers, kind of teaching the teachers to make
Yes.
more of that impact?
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, but obviously, like all these, the critical wellness strategy would be applicable to uh, kids as well. Like,
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yes. Um,
do you think there's a certain age where wellness, exercise, breathing, um, thinking big, starting small, even at like projects or like I remember as a kid, like I had this big test and it's you have that anxiety, the worry, but it's like just prepare today. Like if someone
yeah.
went back and said, just learn this one thing today,
Mhm.
and you'll build on that. Is there an age limit where we can introduce some of those things to the kids?
You mean like what age is appropriate to begin to introduce some of that stuff? Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, or is it as
Um,
early as possible?
I mean, I think introducing those kind of regulatory like coping mechanisms can happen as soon as you see your child has the capacity to do that stuff. It does take a long time. I mean, it's not gonna it involves practice, you have to stay consistent. There's practice involved, especially if you're doing it with kids. But a couple of things I will add is I think that if you are not willing to integrate and do these strategies yourself, it's hard to lead your students in the same strategies. Like you, in order to be well and to lead your students in their own wellness, you have to first give that to yourself first. You have to make that a priority within your own lifestyle, within your own like schedule and routine. Um so that's why I always say, like, I think teachers should be doing these things with their students because it's important for your students to see that you also are prioritizing wellness and you're also, valuing these kinds of experiences. But to your question, yes, I think like when I'm thinking about my own students and even with my son and my daughter, I mean, we started breathing and using things like the calm app when he was 5, and he has ADHD, so you can imagine that getting him to do breath work and like relax, like being calm and relaxed did take a while, but he did, as he grew older, he was able to name that as one of the strategies that he enjoyed and likes to use, and he'll use the calm app. I mean, he'll ask for it on my phone. He's like, can I do one of those can I do one of those meditations? So
Nice, cool. I love that. Going back to the subjects that uh you kind of started with, was it did I hear English initially, or was there other things that you taught?
well, I taught first and second grade. That's basically my career for 13 years, and teaching kids how to read, because they're in the primary grades, that was a huge part of that. So I did teach, all the subjects: science, social studies, math, um, all that stuff, reading comprehension, writing. But reading was like the biggest thing for me. I think mainly because I really struggled as a reader growing up. That was something I really had a hard time learning how to read. So I knew what it was like to struggle, and I really focused a lot of energy on that because I knew that if my students couldn't read, then the rest of their education would be a struggle.
Yeah, I remember I moved to the US in second grade,
Okay.
and it was the biggest culture shock, and not knowing the language, but just getting thrown into the public classroom. And like in fifth grade, I was still like last on the reading list. We had like this chart,
Yeah.
and I
Yeah.
was I felt so embarrassed. But my teachers would constantly be pouring, like just walking me through like word by word.
Yeah.
And then I don't know what happened, but like it just switched it from like middle school to high school. Like the love for reading kind of came through. Like once I understood the words, the meaning, and I'm
Yeah.
like, wow, this is amazing. And then there's like so much literature, and I can go into it. That passion kind of drove me. I think I was more like sixth grade. I started loving history, so then I
Okay.
would go into that, and then it just opened up so many more doors. But how do you kind of pull that passion out of students, or now if you're working with teachers, like what are some tips that you give to them on how they can uh, accelerate that learning for their students?
Um, I think, wow, that's a great question. I think a couple of things I would say about that. I think first and foremost, you need to develop an identity around reading. I think when kids come in, they either know already. I mean, I didn't teach kindergarten, but when they came into first grade, which is the lowest grade that I taught, they already had a good, a kind of a personal understanding of where they were. They either could read or they couldn't. You know what I mean?
Mm,
So once you hold an identity, even when you're that little, it can impact how you approach a task, right?
mm,
So really developing an identity around them being readers, and I did that by um I got my doctorate, and so I'm also a researcher, right? So I was like, okay, they need evidence. They need evidence. We need to provide the evidence. They need to see the evidence that they can read, right? And so I would dial it way back, and I would give them things to do that I knew that they could succeed at. And I would tally the things. I'd be like, okay, we're gonna read this passage, and I'm gonna do a tally mark for every word that you read. And then I'm gonna do a tally mark for every word that you don't read. And you can do this. I mean, I used to do this for reading and writing. For every tally mark that you write, I mean, for every word that you write, I'm gonna give you a tally mark. And when you're done with the book and you can see that there's like 26 tally marks and like 5 mistakes, and you're like, look, this is reading. You're reading. Yeah,
mm,
you made the 5 mistakes, but you're reading. This is who you are. You're a reader. This is you reading. Um, and if you do that enough at a level that they that they're going to succeed at, they do begin to kind of take on that identity and
mm.
see themselves as a reader, and then that's when they begin to approach harder tasks because they have like a foundation to build off of. Um, so yeah, that's the first thing is I think reading teachers don't really think about that as they're like little people as having identities, but their kids have identities. They have an understanding of who they are. And then the second strategy is also embedded in what I just explained, giving them things to do that are below their ability so that you can build them up. Um, because you want them to feel a sense of efficacy. You want them to feel a sense of confidence because no one's going to approach a task unless they have a sense of confidence. Does that make sense? Like if they think they can't do it, they're not going to do it. You have to say, okay, you have to give them something a little bit easy and then kind of slowly feed them harder things once they kind of get built up. Um,
That makes sense. That kind of back to that starting small concept of
yeah.
you don't need to go into the high level book that might be
Mm-mm.
challenging, or they might not have the confidence, but is would it be a good strategy to start on books that you see that they like, or have
Oh,
a passion in, or something that draws them?
yes, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, anything, different things that get them excited.
Mhm.
I just remember having like a ton of nonfiction books because that I had a group of boys, and they just love those nonfiction books. And they were so driven by the content that they would, um, like reading collaboration and trying to figure out the words because they wanted to know what they were, what the information was, what the subject was about, whatever it was.
Funny. Yeah.
Yeah. So,
Do,
yeah, I
do
definitely think that's
you
true.
think it's harder nowadays for kids to read because of the competitive phones and iPads and all the devices that compete for their attention, to take it away from physical books or even digital books? But like there's so much notification and
Hmm.
like obviously I think it might I think it's a little more difficult, but kids are still reading, kids are still learning. But what are your thoughts around modern day age? Like, is it?
Like technology, like
Yes.
the use of technology. Um, the thing about technology is that I think the thing with technology is that it lowers our it challenges our attention spans. And so our students are learning within or interacting within environments where they don't have to keep their attention for a long span of time. Even us as adults, we don't, I mean, social media is a huge culprit. Like we don't have to, we're not used to doing something that holds our attention for a long period of time. And so the thing about learning how to read and these other academic subjects and topics is you have to sustain focus for a little bit, I mean, for a good amount of time. Um, and because our brains are malleable, um, you can increase that endurance in the classroom. It does take a little bit of time. Starting like that whole thing, think big, start small. You can start with 5 minutes of sustained reading, then 7 minutes of sustained reading, and engage your students in that so that they teach them the word endurance. Like, what does endurance mean? And we're going to practice this and do this and interact with this for 5 minutes, and then we might take a break. And our goal is that by the end of the month, if we do this and we increase the number of minutes as we move through the month, by the end of the month we'll have 15-20 minutes, um, because our students don't have long attention spans, and that's the biggest impact I see, um, is that they're not reading for sustained time. They're on the technology and it's scrolling through. There's like different pop-ups and call outs, and so they're in, the way, I mean, it's kind of like our education system hasn't caught up with the way that technology is asking us to interact with it. um I mean, and in some ways, technology can be a way, a pathway for students to read, um but it makes me nostalgic because I always enjoyed reading a book. I still enjoy just sitting and reading a book, and I want that same experience for my kids.
Yeah, it's fascinating, and again, probably yeah, like we can go in depth on this for hours, and I'm sure you have
Yeah.
more of the scientific research and things like that. But it's good to at least open up that conversation for you guys listening. Just know there might be a good balance of technology, phones. when's the right time. And if you guys have questions, I'll guide you to Heather and what they're doing. Um, Kind of going into, we've touched upon this, but your mission and your passion for education, like what's your purpose in the field? Like, what's your calling? Um,
My calling right now is to keep teachers of color in the profession and sustainable in the profession. And I'm choosing teachers of color, that population, because they having a person that reflects who you are, your identity as a student, impacts all of student academic success indicators like across the board. It has just a super positive impact. And so as our student demographics are changing, 40% of the students in the United States are students of color. Our teacher demographics should at least match that. And what's happening right now is 65% of teachers of color will leave the profession by the time they reach their 5th year. So
wow.
these are people, yeah, these are people that have spent time and money getting their degrees, and they are leaving because like they're just like, I can't do it. I'm not, I can't do it.
Where did they go? I'm curious. Like, what's that transition for them? Do, do, do you have that pulse?
Um, I mean, I think a lot of them go into entrepreneurship. Some of them do other jobs. A lot of people, a lot of teachers of color, at least the ones that I work with, like in a professional space, teaching is their second career. So they might have had a previous a job that they were working on, in. So they might go back to that. Um, but it's just pretty, it's really, I know it's devastating to them. I know because when I left, it was devastating for me. When I left the classroom, it was really hard. Um, and so I know that's a really hard decision, especially when you've spent time and money involved in that goal. And I think that it doesn't have to be that way. And so a lot of what I do is just to bring awareness around that issue, and to also try to get districts and schools to change some of their practices so that people of color feel more at home in the schools that they teach in.
Yeah, well, I love that, and I love that you have a specific person that you're serving instead of just teachers, because I think it's different for everyone, and that what they experience is different. I didn't know that 40% of students in the U.S. are
Mm-hmm.
students of color.
Mm-hmm.
So having that teacher of color for them to resonate with, and again, maybe there's a language barrier
Yeah.
or whatever that case is. So I think that's really, really important. And again, thank you for doing that. Again, I feel like there's so much that can be said around how to keep teachers. Like, what do you think is the biggest dissatisfaction um, that they end up leaving after 5 years? Like, is there a low hanging fruit that can be
Oh,
changed?
that's a great question. Um, I think the biggest thing, well, obviously pay is huge. I mean, pay is big. The way the way we pay our teachers across the United States, there's so much discrepancy depending on where you live. So that obviously is huge. Um, and that plays a huge part in my research with teachers of color, because a lot of them, if putting them in a mass group, but they cannot afford they can't afford the education they need to become teachers, and so that's why oftentimes it takes them such a long time to get into the classroom, and then once they're in the classroom, they can't afford to take care of their families. They can't buy a house. They can't pay their bills back, their education, college, university loans and things. They have a really hard time paying those back. And so that's when they begin to think like, okay, this is not, I can't do this, and then if they have kids or they're taking care of loved ones. So that's more of like a concrete logistical issue. But I think the other biggest thing is just, I would say, sense of belonging. And that encompasses a lot of different things. Like, what are our public school systems doing to communicate to people of color in general that they belong in those spaces? And our school institution, like a lot of the institutions in the United States, were built on white supremacist values. capitalism. Um, and so when you put, a community of teachers of color within that system, they're going to experience things like, racism, injustices, microaggressions. I mean, the things that I could tell you, it's just not right. Being targeted, um, heavily stereotyped, all those things really begin, and then you're not getting paid, and you're having to deal with all this stuff, and you're not getting paid, and you're there for the students, but sometimes it's like, okay, well, I have to protect my own self and my own well-being. So
Hmm.
in my own family, and it just begins to become a lot.
I'm not in the field, or haven't been in like departments or schools or anything like that, but is there any transparency around pay? Because it's public and kind
Yeah.
of affiliated with state or federal uh, jurisdictions or whatever.
Yes.
Is
Yes.
there any transparency in principal level district teachers, like who's getting what and why, or is it very hidden and kind of um not political, but what's the word, like bureaucratic?
Yeah.
Is it open or bureaucratic?
That's a great question. I mean, like you said, you can search a pay scale for any school district in the United States, and it should come up. Um, but yes, there is research that said that, like I've seen stuff by like different graphs by state, where the teachers are paid the most based on where they live. Um, but and one of the best paying states is California. So I've never, like, and my husband is a social studies teacher, and he works at a charter school, and he gets paid well. He's been teaching for over 20 years. But in other places, like in the south, some places in the south and other states, teachers are making $50,000 to $60,000 a year.
Hmm.
Like, that is ridiculous. That is ridiculous. You can't even pay for gas. Like, how are you going to rent a house? How are you going to provide for your family? Like, it's just um that's just infuriating. And so I think, like, we need, I don't know, I mean, this is me just dreaming, but having some baseline for teachers for pay that is comparable to the cost of living,
Yeah, obviously that's like headline news where it's
Yeah.
not just at this level conversation, but
Yes. Yes.
the biggest outlets are discussing these things. I do wonder if there can be changes. Obviously, again, people like yourself are more in the field and you guys drive that change. I'm just trying to provide this platform. Hopefully, people
Right.
can hear and do that. But I do wonder if there can be a way where if students, at the end of the day, this is about the students, like you mentioned, their success. The teachers are doing this for the love. If like teachers can have a way where the students that have gone on and I don't know, they've graduated with all A's, or I don't know, good attendance, good behavior, whatever that metric is, where uh, the states judge by. I wonder, like, if there can be some kind of meritocracy, like, okay, this teacher, 5 plus years, 95% of their students have like gone on to do
Yeah.
such and such and such. They deserve X amount. Like
Yeah.
something like that. Obviously, that's probably easier said than done, and that's me dreaming. But
Yeah.
there has to be a way for the ones that have put in their
Yeah.
time and, and brought out good students should be paid above what other people are getting paid that are surviving.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's, I guess, us dreaming, but I hope the work that you're doing and the research and the connections you're making push this forward even more so. And if there's ways that we can help teachers with the product side or additional resources, I would love your feedback on that. Um, going towards the students now, and um, maybe like what they have to have or skills they need in order to be successful after after high school, what would you say are some foundational skills or things that students have to have post high school to fit in and find success in the real world?
Um, I think one of the biggest gifts you can give your kids is an opportunity for them to develop an understanding about what they're capable of and what their limits are. And what that really entails and means is that you have to give them opportunities to take risks. You have to, encourage them to take risks, try different things, new things, and continue to challenge them so that when they are by themselves, they have a strong sense of who they are as people, what their skills are, um, and what they're capable of. I think a lot of times we, I think a lot of times students will they're not given enough freedom to kind of do their own thing. We want to protect, we don't want them to fail, we want to protect them. And so I'm speaking from a teacher perspective and also a parent perspective. I think oftentimes we get in that framework where we don't want them to fail and we kind of want to protect them, but I think it's in that failure that they really begin to learn more about who they are and what and like I said, what they're capable of. And that's the biggest gift I think you can do, especially if, you said your audience was parents and teachers with students with disabilities. That's, I think, really important because um, they are going to be, exiting into a life, a program where the world is going to be out there, and they have to have a strong sense of who they are. And, these are my weaknesses, but these are also my strengths. And how can I leverage my strengths to address the weaknesses? And how can I
Mhm.
move forward with what I have?
Yeah, I love that. That's so big. Um, so this is to summarize as I'm writing my notes. So capability, what they're capable of, risk taking, kind of encouraging that, a strong sense of identity,
Hmm.
knowing ourselves, strengths, weaknesses, can we improve the weaknesses, and then the F word that we I always dreaded seeing a F on my papers, but fail. Yeah, as a student, I again there was so much like embarrassment when I would see that, or like they I remember my teachers would like hand me the paper upside down,
Mm,
and I knew I failed. But like looking back, I wouldn't have been had any amount of success in anything if it wasn't for failing. Like
yeah.
no one does anything right the first time or second time. Like it's just a constant iteration. It's like, okay, I'm doing this thing for the first time. Is it going to work well? Probably not, but okay, I learned something and on to the next thing. So I love how you're mentioning it, and I hope students can embrace that. Like it's, I don't know if it's built into the school system where obviously there's grades. We want everyone wants an A, but just because we get that F doesn't mean we don't know anything or we're I don't know, like we're useless. Like it's a sign. It's just it's a
Hmm.
ticker. Like okay, for
Hmm.
now
Hmm.
you didn't know this, but
Hmm.
I don't know. I hope there might be a way to kind of fix. I don't know if that's just my feeling or by and large that's how students feel, but I wish there's some change on like okay, an F doesn't mean anything really outside of that. It's like a snapshot of that moment, but I hope people can learn from that and say, okay, next time I'm gonna bump that up and I'm gonna learn. So I love how you mentioned that, just embracing that failure. So
Can
that's really
I
good.
can I add to that? Because what you
Yeah,
said really
please.
something really resonated with me about what you said. I think because I have my two, I told you I had two kids, but then I also have an older one who's 18. She's in college and she's a pianist, pianist vocal. She did vocals and pianist, jazz pianist. And I mean all of them, whatever. She would have an incident where she felt like she bombed her vocal performance or whatever it is. And I think what's important to remember, and I think what happens with students and even us as adults is that we think we had a failure and then we've lost we've lost our value.
Mm.
We've lost something, right? So like she would come home from the, like, she'd be in tears. You could see her eyes are watering. I'm like, just because you failed doesn't take away any of the knowledge that you have, or anything that you still have all the knowledge and experience that you brought to that performance. Like nothing is taken away from you. Like you still have value. You still have something to offer this space. You still have all the skill set that you had before you did your vocal performance. Like you still have that. You messed up. That's okay. None of that is taken away from you. And I think sometimes when we fail or we get a bad grade, it almost feels like a scoop of us got taken out and thrown, like, well, that's not a good part of us anymore. But that's not what it means. It means that it's a data point about this specific moment in time. It doesn't mean that all the stuff happened. I mean, she's been a piano vocalist since she was like 8. Like, okay, you've been doing this forever. Like, that doesn't take anything away from your experience or any of the skills that you've gained by going to vocals class for like, twice a week for the last 8 years. Like, this is just one thing that happened. And like, let's just like, provide that evidence. You kind of have to show them and kind of give them that perspective, because right there in that moment, it does feel like, I'm nothing. I have an F. An F on, taking a person, here's an F on my forehead. That doesn't mean everything that you bring is wrong. It's this one thing that happened this one time.
Yeah, 100%. And again, I just from my personal experience, I remember like I didn't even want to go home when I
Mhm.
got that F, because I knew like, okay, as
Yeah.
bad as I feel now, my parents are gonna like
Tear
make
you
me
up.
go
Yeah.
go all in on that. But like I feel like it should all just be flipped on its head. Like F should be celebrated as long as
Yeah.
the that pressure of uh, shame, like the lack of, or the feeling of like I'm nothing, as long
Mhm.
as that goes away, like we just say, okay, that doesn't exist. It's just an F. It's a data point, like you said. If that goes away, then the kid knows, okay, why did I get this? And then goes through the notes. Okay, oh, okay, interesting. That's the exact point of where we learn. And like, okay,
Yes.
then you got an A.
Yes.
You got an A on your F.
Yeah.
So yeah, I hope
Got
some
an A on
that
your F. That's awesome. I
I
like
hope
that.
that that just flips on its head, because I didn't want to even go home when I had my paper graded, but maybe like parents can sit next to their kid and go through those notes, and then again that F can turn into an A, and next time like there can be like that chippiness. I was competitive by nature, like I didn't want to get an F, but then
Yeah.
next time I'm like, okay, I'm gonna prove everyone wrong. Like I'm gonna study this, and then
Yeah.
lo and behold, like that's I didn't graduate with A's, but I think it was like
Yeah.
B's and some C's. But anyway, this is really helpful. Like just I think your perspective, how you're wording things, and what you're doing is really valuable. I wish we can do this again and go deeper
Yeah.
into some of these conversations. But for the sake of time, maybe leaving with how people can connect with you if they have questions. Where can they get in touch? I know you're on Instagram, and I'm gonna leave that. But is there any other places that they can get a hold of you or chat?
On my website, teachersofcolormatter.com. That's a good place to look. And then of course on my Instagram page, you can DM me. That's a great place. But I've just really enjoyed this conversation as well. It's been great.
Awesome, cool. Well, I'll definitely leave your handles below,
Okay.
and for you guys listening, I hope there was some value out of this. If there is, please leave a comment, subscribe, um, go follow Heather on her Instagram and her website. Again, I'll leave that in the description. If there's any questions that you guys have, feel free to comment, ask her, and hopefully in future conversations we'll get there, or bring other people on and panels and have further discussions. So, Heather, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
You're welcome. The pleasure's been mine. I really appreciate
Okay,
it.
bye.